Hey everybody, welcome back to this edition of the Gaming Tailgate podcast. I'm CDJ. The band is back together. I feel like I'm Mick, Tommy, you're clearly Ronnie, and Jeremy, you're clearly Keith Richards. JB Huskers and Gashwenti here. Going to talk about the new Dynasty improvements coming to NCAA Football 13. First off, Tommy, how are you?
Doing pretty good, although I'm not sure if it's flattery or not.
JB?
I must have apparently just fallen out of a tree, man.
That's why I picked him for you. Anyway, let's talk about Dynasty mode improvements coming to the game. We've talked about this on the forums, and let's give an overall kind of a big look at it. There's some things in here that are pretty big, like Stories of Saturday and the bottom line ticker in terms of you'll see them, they're very visible. But there's a lot of smaller things that were added to Dynasty mode that the belief is, and obviously we won't know until we play the game for a few weeks or months, that we think are going to add a lot of longevity and add a new approach to online dynasties. First off, let's talk about the Online Dynasty Live dashboard. I think as we all can admit, the number one issue last year with Online Dynasty, 2 words, transfer failed. A lot of people who wanted to get into Online Dynasty and traditionally have played a lot of years of it couldn't. A lot of these random errors and bugs coming through, all of a sudden one day the Dynasty would not work and there was nothing they could do. How important is this, Tommy, as someone who's run a league for a long time? How important is this now to have this live dashboard? I'll let you talk about what it does and the importance of it.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, basically, in the past, the transfer failed error message would basically cover all manners of sins. There wasn't specific error messages. There wasn't anything to tell EA that, hey, this is exactly what the user is experiencing. And now on the console side, you'll see various error messages. If you do get an error, it'll be a specific error message that'll tell you exactly what's going on. And as well, on EA's end, they'll basically get a flag that says, hey, this user experienced this error, and they'll be able to collect all this information about what was going on and everything like that, instead of having to have you track all that down for them. It's going to be pretty big. I mean, it's not going to completely eliminate all possible errors. Who knows what new error may come out, but at least they're basically setting up to where if the error does occur, they can know exactly what's going on and then approach it from there on how to fix it. Obviously, they've done pretty much everything they can to fix the ones that we've experienced in 12, so hopefully we don't have all of those and we don't have as many, but at the same time, it's going to basically help them on their end to do things better. And as well, for the guys that don't go to message boards all the time and don't know that there's workarounds for all these things or that you can reload the Dynasty, things like that, for your average Joe, they don't know that there's workarounds, so they basically just kind of throw their hands up in the air and walk away. So getting those errors fixed is huge because for the guy that's not paying attention, he needs to have that assurance that everything's fixed for him.
Are you as surprised as I am that they haven't made a bigger deal about this? After the January event, we were able to go back to the forums community and talk about it. But during the webcast and blog, I may be wrong, but I don't believe there was any mention. If there was, it was very minor. Are you kind of surprised or disappointed there wasn't more of a public mention of this, considering how many people were affected by it?
Well, they didn't mention the dashboard that they have or anything like that, but they did mention that there will be unique error messages, and then also saying, mea culpa, we messed up and we're working to fix it, that sort of thing. On one hand, I'm surprised just because it is a big deal and it should be addressed, but at the same time, when you're a video game designer or just simply any company releasing a new product, you don't want to look at the past, you just want to look at the future. So on one hand, I can see it, but at the same time, you don't want to talk about your failures in the past. You want to talk about what you're doing good now.
Well, let's talk about some of the good things they've added to Dynasty mode. The 2 most visible, let's get to those first, as soon as you go in and start playing a Dynasty game, are going to be the ESPN bottom line ticker. This matches what you see on ESPN broadcasting. You'll be getting live updates on the bottom as games are going through. You'll get the score, the quarter, time remaining. You'll get priority score updates, upset alerts, just general games of importance. You'll see what's going on around the country for the first time in Online Dynasty. This is something that I think there aren't many things that we can universally agree on, but I think this might be one that leans towards that direction, where a lot of people said in Online Dynasty they felt like they were on an island. They knew they had their game, and they knew what they had to do for the week, but really no clue what was going on nationally around the country. Now we're going to get scores, and along with this, probably the bigger part of this is the Stories of Saturday. We'll be getting studio updates from ESPN's Reese Davis. He'll give scores from around the country, kind of breaking in with what's going on. So you'll have the ticker, which will give you updates. But maybe if you're not paying attention, you're really into your game, and these updates, just like in real life, hopefully will give a feeling of what's important, breaking information, a huge game somewhere, whether it's a great performance, a top 25 game, an upset, a rivalry game, maybe one of your rivals is winning or losing, or a conference game that has an impact on the standing for you. Those are some of the things we're going to see. Jeremy, you've played the game a decent amount at community events, and I know you've gone into Dynasty mode a little bit. How much do you think this is going to finally add to Dynasty mode, an online Dynasty as well, to have the ESPN bottom line ticker and the stories of Saturday?
Definitely a huge addition, mainly for the fact, like you said, they're no longer on an island. There's always concerns people have had if this ongoing ticker, these flashing priority alerts, is this going to distract you in game? And what I have to say is, if it doesn't distract you while you're sitting there watching a game on ESPN, it probably won't distract you while you're playing the game on your PlayStation 3 or your 360. It's gonna add a whole new depth. And as we get later on in the year, you're gonna hopefully see the crunch time games. Guys you're chasing in the division or the conference. Or even guys you're chasing it up to try to get to that top 2 BCS slot. As the season progresses, these kind of things kind of almost give you a little added pressure if you're kind of pushing for those positions, because you're also keeping your eye on that scoreboard while you're trying to win the game.
In Dynasty mode, everyone wants to feel like they're building a program, and that's the key that we've had with last year with Coaching Carousel. And you take a coordinator, and I think a lot of us, you start off as maybe a 1 or 2 star school, and hopefully build up that program, get hired away somewhere else, whether it be as a coordinator at a bigger school or even a head coach somewhere else. People want to feel like they're building a program. So with that this year, one of the big things they've added, and this is what I call, I think I got to give credit to Quizzy, community member Matt Kyler said it the best. There's a lot of things in here that are sneaky good. And this is something that's probably not going to be a back-of-the-box feature. But for the guys who are really into Dynasty, I think this is one of those things that is going to add a lot. Dynamic pitches. These are the pitches that when you're recruiting and you're talking with the recruits and communicating with them, that these can change more throughout the year, and some of these change even week to week. So an area that you start off the year very poor in, you could become pretty solid at by the end of the year, and also vice versa, that you really want to take advantage of when you have a high rating in those categories. Tommy, I'll go to you first. Building a program, how big is this now to have these dynamic pitches that change? In your opinion, will it make you feel like you're having a bigger impact on a program?
Absolutely. You basically now get to control just about all of the team ratings. You have some sort of influence on those ratings. Before in the past, I think a lot of it was just simply driven by BCS ranking or something like that. But now it's going to be, if you're winning games on TV and if you're, different things like that are actually going to impact these ratings, it is up to you to improve upon them. So it becomes a new game as far as, I think one of the examples that they gave in the Dynasty webcast was that, so for example, if you're trying to go after some stud running back, you can start running the ball a lot more than you maybe normally would, and so therefore your team's playing style will be influenced by the way you're play calling in the game. And in that way, that running back now, since that's the most important thing to him, that's now going to be a bigger influence on you being able to sign him or not. So it's all a matter of you having more control over your team and being able to influence, different things throughout not only that season, but from week to week and season to season. It's going to really be something that you'll get to see change over time.
Okay, with that, and I think you bring up a good point, is that with now your play mattering more to recruits, especially on the play style one, which is very important. I know I saw it firsthand where I had success running the ball throughout the early part of the Dynasty, so obviously the run-blocking linemen had a higher interest. Running backs had better interest. JB, now, is that going to change the way people play maybe, especially when taking over or building a program? And maybe I'll ask you personally what you would do and then also how you think it affects the game. So let's say you take a team that starting off with is an air raid, but you really want to run the option or some kind of power offense. Do you run the offense that helps you win now, or do you force that new system in? Is that something that you can see kind of being a internal game within a game now of deciding, what do I do, take the wins or build for the future? Talk about your thoughts on that.
I think it's going to just depend on who you have. I mean, if you've got a guy that's a pocket passer with D speed, you're not going to be running the option to try to get his option quarterback in the game. Something we're going to be talking about later is the athletes that'll come into the game, the triple threat athletes. If you kind of recruit them just try to chase after them and not really focus on the playing style so much, because you got an athlete that's going to be able to go a few different ways. So if you do have that pocket passer that can't run worth a damn, then obviously you're not going to try to force it there. But at the same time, if you've got a backup that's suitable, or even a starter that's halfway fast, and maybe you got a stud running back, then maybe you try to throw that option in. It kind of just depends on where your team's at and how good your personnel is at the time. And if you don't really have the personnel for an option offense at the time, maybe try to chase after an athlete that can maybe end up evolving into that quarterback in the end.
And to go along with that, your number 2 wide receiver already is on campus, and he is an athlete that can play receiver or quarterback. Now you have that, you've just taken over this new team, and now you've got these players. You've got to figure out where you want them to play. So it basically, you have a decision. Is it going to be more important for me to be able to run the option, or is it going to be more important for me to be able to throw the ball around, whether you stick with the pocket or move that receiver over to quarterback? So it's definitely going to be more of a game outside of the game.
I mean, this year, if you've got a low rating as a team on something like conference prestige or TV exposure, if you're one of those lower rated teams, this year more than ever, your points are really going to be limited when you recruit those pitches. So if you are a smaller school trying to build up to a better caliber, you may have to force that playing style just because of the fact you need something that's going to have a positive pitch, because you're not going to have too many of those good pitches to choose from. You may have, proximity to home, academic prestige. You may just have a handful of items, because now if you've got a bad rating and even the recruit isn't even interested at all, you're going to really get basically 0 to 10 points, sometimes maybe negative. So with those smaller schools, it may force your hand, but if you're on a more of a powerhouse, I think you'll have a little more flexibility with what you want to do.
And that's kind of something, JB, you just touched on that EA didn't really talk much about, but that we've mentioned on the forums. The rating or the calls, while you're going through and making a call, the points you get for those calls is going to be drastically changed. So, like this year, if you're an A+ and it's the recruit is tabbed as a most for that pitch, you're going to get upwards of 200 points for that particular pitch. Whereas if you are a D and a low, then you're going to get, single digits or maybe low double digits. Or even if you have A and they consider low, you're still not going to get nearly as much as you used to in the past. It's going to basically make those major pitches going to be that much more important for you to have to try to build on.
Going back to the original question, as you guys were talking, I was kind of thinking about what I would do in this situation. And the example I'm going to use is the basic one and the glory one, the quarterback position. So let's say you start off with a guy who's a passing quarterback, but you really eventually want to appeal to a scrambler. So the way I remember it, and if I'm wrong, you guys can correct me afterwards, it'll look at your passing yards and your run yards, basically, as a quarterback and the quarterback position. So you start off, and maybe your best threat for year one is to pass it. So you pass it, but you remember, okay, I got to get some rush yards. So maybe you don't get to the scrambler range in year one, but you kind of remember, and this would be like a new coach trying to implement a system slowly. You tell your quarterback, and if you're playing with them, you make them do this. But you say, once in a while, look for that run once in a while. Because you never know. All it takes is a couple big runs here and there, and you could have a pretty decent day running the ball. So maybe that evolution isn't a one-year thing, and maybe it's a couple years. But then you go from appealing to passing, or the guys with a strong arm, pocket passer, to the balanced quarterbacks. And then when those guys who hopefully have a little bit better speed and acceleration, then you start running it more and more to appeal to the scramblers. But then obviously dealing with the pocket passers, you have to be careful, because if that guy gets hurt, you're really screwed. Because more than likely, then you're going to have a guy who's a bad passer and probably not very good at running the ball. So there's a lot of things to think about here that I don't think we're really going to understand or appreciate as community members or individuals until we get the game. And one thing I wanted to bring up, another one of the dynamic pitches and we won't go through all of them here. People can go to thegamingtailgate.com and see them. Dynamic conference prestige. JB, you brought it up, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I would have forgotten about it. This is one the community really wanted after last year because NCAA 12 added in custom conferences, a feature that people really, really liked, but they got a little turned off when they got the game. They readjusted their conference, and no matter what they did, the SEC was always awesome. It was always rated an A, even if it was gutted down to 4 teams. Well, this year what they've done is it will take the average ranking of the top 6 teams in the conference, or if they have less, obviously the proper number, and then I believe it uses the coaches poll, and so whatever conference has the best ranking, they'll have the highest rating and go down through all the conferences. So that's another one where over time, theoretically, if programs drop off the map, you could see the SEC drop down a little bit. I know playing at the community event, I saw the SEC was almost always towards the top, so it looked like it was pretty solid, at least through the limited time, year or two that I went through, that the SEC was always pretty strong. So that I think that speaks volumes for these dynamic pitches, and that it does mean something.
And going back to what you were talking about there, building up, another thing you got to worry about, especially if your guy is a pocket passer, you got to worry about getting sacked. So it could be a 2 or 3 year process, just because you want to maybe even build up your – if you've got a team that's a pure pocket passing team and you absolutely want to make them a scrambling team, well, you got to watch your sacks, because in college a sack counts negative against the rush yards. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so you'll also want to you want to make sure you got a good line before – that may come down to picking the team that you want to start with. You want to start with a team that's got a solid line, and if you want to try to turn them into an option team, you want to make sure you got a team with a solid line, because if you take too many sacks in one game, you're really going nowhere with it.
Well, and just to clarify, as I understand it, and I may be mistaken, but my understanding was it's not just on stats, but it's also on your play calling. So you may have that pocket passer, and if you force him to run option, by calling the option plays, you may potentially have more chance to sign that option quarterback, whether or not you succeed. Now, obviously, the more you succeed, the better that play style will be as well. But as I understand it, it's not just success.
But it's still going to be both, though. I mean, if you're running it a bunch and terrible at it, it theoretically could negate somewhat.
Right. I mean, if you're running absolutely no option, then that's obviously the bottom barrel for that option quarterback. But if you're running option and not succeeding, then you have a better chance than not running it at all.
Got it. That's another thing we should bring up with the phone call system to make sure, because EA's mentioned it, and I think the people who have heard this have really liked this, is that this year the coach, meaning the user, gets to drive the call. That you'll pick the topics. There is the one-time random prospects choice, and you get a little bit of a bonus for doing that. But otherwise, the dice roll format in terms of not knowing what you're going to talk about is gone. So this way now you'll feel like you're driving the phone call, so you can pick those pitches that you excel in. And that's something that I think will help a lot as well. Because if you were at the mercy of the dice roll, you may not care as much about the dynamic pitches. Because, yeah, you can make them better, but you're not getting to pick them very often. Whereas now you get to pick them the vast majority of the time, so therefore you're going to have an interest in monitoring them and wanting to improve them. And there's a new screen within recruiting. It's been there in the past. It's called My School, but that's been redone in terms of showing you your ratings, how they're configured. And some of these you get to see more than ever before, such as the toughest places to play. In the past, you used to only see the top 25. Now you can see the 1 through 123. That way you know exactly where you're at and who you're trying to compete with and move up the ranks with. So the My School page within recruiting, I think, is going to get more screen time by users this year than ever before. Let's talk about the triple threat athletes that you guys brought up a little bit earlier. Tommy, I'll let you talk about it. What are these, and how important is this now to recruiting?
Basically, these are similar to the old athletes that we had before. You recruit them just like normal. The only difference is that these athletes will have the ability to excel in multiple positions. In the past, they could squeeze into a secondary position or something like that, but generally you always knew what their focus was. But now you might find an athlete that is just as good as a quarterback, a receiver, and a defensive back, or you might find a fullback that can also play linebacker or something like that. And they basically can play up to 3 different positions, and they'll be viable at any one of those 3 positions. So now you're recruiting him, you've signed him, now you have to decide, where do I actually need that guy? Where is he going to fit into my team? So it definitely becomes a new game of just going after your athletes just simply because you think that they're going to improve your team regardless where they are on the field. And then as well, you'll now be able to recruit those guys that can play your option quarterback. You'll be able to recruit those Cam Newtons and Robert Griffins and players like that can run your option, that have that speed, that have that acceleration and juke, and you don't have to worry about, putting in some wide receiver to run your Wildcat. You could have a guy that can do everything for you if you want to.
Another aspect, and this is one that before the show we were talking, and it's something we don't feel EA has brought up a whole lot, is the potential to break into an athlete's top 10. It's something also where boards now for players, currently in NCAA 12, the boards almost, I believe they have 10 teams every time. Now you might go look at a player, and he may have as few as, I believe, maybe one or two or three, and that's it. Granted, the way we recruit now, if you see a player that doesn't have you on there, there's a lot of users who won't even bother to look at that guy. Whereas now, even if you're not on his board, you still will probably want to recruit him. Tommy, I know you spent a lot of time talking to Jordan about this. I'll let you have the floor again. Talk about how big this is with recruiting and how people are going to have to rethink the way they recruit and keep in mind this new board layout and breaking into the top 10.
Yeah, it is really big because now you're not going to see, you're not going to see a player's top 10 teams. You're going to see actually teams that player is interested in. So you may only see 2 or 3 teams for a particular player to start the season because those are the teams that he's initially interested in. But if you start talking to him and giving him a lot of interest from every week, then he'll add you into that list of teams. And obviously it can be up to 10 teams, but it won't always be 10 teams. And, he may start out the season with these 3 powerhouse schools, and they never give him any attention, so he starts dropping those off and starts actually paying attention to the teams that are talking to him. So it becomes a really big thing that on 12, I know I would get really frustrated at talking to this guy for the entire season. I would give him an hour every week, and he would never break me into his top 10 list. And I'm sitting here saying, I'm going to sell my first daughter for you if you'll just simply come play my team. And then at the end of the season, he still hasn't actually signed with anybody until week 5 of the off season. He'll just simply magically pick a team, and you're not it. Those were the most frustrating things of all, and this basically will help that a lot. You're not necessarily still going to be able to sign guys that are out of your reach because the computer's going to end up going after those guys eventually. But at least now you can know where you stack, and if you never actually hit his top 10 board, you know why. It's because he's not interested in you. You might as well move on.
New this year is also scouting. You devote time each week, and you can see actual player ratings for their attributes and also their overall rating. This is something that when you set up your board to start the year in the preseason, you'll want to remember that when you set it up, you'll have 20 hours to go in and scout. That's something in the past you just added players to the board, and then when you went to week 1, you started the recruiting. Now you are able to scout. During the regular season, you'll have 3 hours a week, significantly less. That 20 hours in the preseason lets you really figure out who do I want on my board. That's kind of your, the key time, really. In the past, it was kind of I don't want to say a throwaway period, but you could readjust your board and make up for it later on, whereas now it's pretty important to start off well. JB, talk about scouting, your overall, any thoughts, anything you want to talk about with it?
Well, scouting definitely adds a lot of depth into the recruiting process. Like you said, right away in the beginning, you're going to get 20 hours, which basically is just like recruiting. You can spend at most an hour on one player in the preseason and an hour on one player during each week in the regular season. And the fact that you get 20 hours in the preseason, you really can do a lot of digging and research for those guys that love to kind of dig into the numbers, dig into the ratings, look at the letter grades. It's going to be a real big addition for those guys that love to really, dig into it and try to find who they really want. And then by able to do the scouting feature, not only do you get you get to kind of look a little closer at what they want, but you're going to know exactly what their ratings are. They could end up being a bust or a gem, based on what their actual ratings are going to be. You're not going to get the whole picture on the athletes, which everybody's going to go after this year. You're not going to get that whole picture just yet because the athlete has so many ratings. But you may be able to get a full picture on some like defensive tackles, maybe even a middle linebacker. If you're focused purely on speed, well, hopefully the speed ratings will kind of break through in that preseason. If you're more of a kind of fundamentals guy, you're looking for the receiver that can catch the ball and a linebacker that can tackle. You're not necessarily looking for speed and agility. Well, you have the chance to kind of uncover that for a whole group of players prior to even advancing into week one. So for the guys that really look in depth into their recruiting and guys that they really want to mold their team, it's definitely huge. It adds a lot of depth. And then once you get into the season, I like how they only limit it to 3 hours. Then you got to kind of pick and choose, especially if you're a guy like me where, the group of guys you initially go after, half of them or 3/4 of them are going elsewhere. You got to kind of scour the board for, to pick up some of those 3-star guys that are hanging out there all year long. So it's nice to kind of give you during the season to kind of pick and choose. You're going to have to, gamble with who you really want to go after because you only got 3 hours to do so, but it does give you the ability to still see what that guy has to offer in season as well. So it's a great tool to kind of help you figure out a little better, is this guy going to fit in my system or not? We were talking about the playing style as a pitch, a recruiting pitch. These kind of tie in together because you're going to be able to kind of mold the team the way you want and end up having given that school the exact kind of letter grade of where you're trying to what direction you're trying to take that team. And scouting definitely makes all of that a lot better.
My big takeaway from the scouting was that the ability that you do have gems and you do have busts that will actually break out of their star level. So you might have guys that have plus 15 or maybe even as much as plus 20 to their overall rating. So you go after that 2-star guy and everybody else thinks that he's really low, but then you scout him and you find out that he's now actually an 80 overall guy that just simply is hidden by everybody else. So not only is it going to make you be able to pick up these guys that maybe nobody else is paying attention to, but it's also going to end up dumping them down to lower-rated CPU teams that they're going to end up with some of these 2-star guys that were gems that were kind of hidden by everybody else. So it's going to make those teams even more viable through over the course of many years in your dynasty. It's definitely going to be a big thing, and it's also going to be the fact that if you're a guy that just looks at star ratings, you're going to end up signing a guy that's 20 points lower than you expected. So you basically have to scout, or at least have to pay attention to those scout ratings to determine whether or not this guy actually fits with what you're trying to do.
I think the biggest thing for scouting that I'm looking forward to is when I get a board and I see this player has 2 or 3 other humans on there within the online dynasty, because especially early in the year, maybe especially in preseason, if I see, let's say, for example, you guys, your schools are on the board. So now I got to think, okay, do I definitely want this guy, or do I want to invest a lot of scouting time right off the bat to realize that maybe he's a bust, maybe he's overrated, or maybe he's an underrated guy? So then that's where I think it's going to get interesting, is that when you see a player with a bunch of fellow Online Dynasty members, I can see people spending a lot of time right off the bat to evaluate him properly. Yeah, and that's almost the way it is in real life, is that if you're concerned that a lot of competitive schools are going after a guy, you need to know right away, is it someone I want or not want?
And that's where all of these new features that we've talked about, they all kind of come full circle, because you're trying to mold your team, which is affected with the dynamic pitches. You're trying to scout to find those gems and busts, but you're kind of determining whether or not you want to scout the guy, because it could be your comrades are on the board as well. And I think the biggest battles of that between the scouting and the battle on the recruiting board is going to come on those athletes, because they're now triple threat. They're going to be more desirable than ever, especially when you're in a full online dynasty. You're going to, like, all these things we've talked about are really coming full circle, because you're going to have a ton of battles for these athletes this year. And scouting is going to be a big tool to determine, well, maybe they're wasting their time, I can back out.
And the last big thing coming to NCAA Football 13's Dynasty Mode is improved web features. Tommy, I know you've seen a few mock-ups of this in action, and you let me know if I'm wrong here, but I believe now the main thing, if we had to summarize it in a sentence, is that everything you can do on the console you can now do on the web, and that includes the off-season activities, which is so important when you have users who, when you want to get everybody together on one night to play, but you have one or two guys who, I work nights, I can't get on, I can't play, I'm sorry, I can't get on. Well, now, hopefully, they can either do it on their smartphone or they can do it on a computer at work, the off-season activities such as carousel and recruiting. Let us know, what do you think of what you've seen or heard about it? And I know you've had more expertise in this area.
Yeah, we kind of just saw some mock-ups of it in April. It still wasn't ready, but they're definitely intending to have it ready for launch. Like you said, it's basically their intent is to get it to close to everything that's on the console as possible. So, the biggest driving factor of that is that now you can do every stage of the off-season on the Dynasty Wire website. That includes coaching carousel, player cuts, looking at training results, et cetera, et cetera. You can do all of that from the website. So it does become a big thing that you don't have to worry about booting up your console or anything like that. And then as well, basically, you could actually... for my online Dynasty, anytime we did the off-season, we just simply all sat around our consoles and just simply all did it at the same time. That way you could knock it out in a couple hours. Well, now you can still do that and do it all from the website and maybe even knock it out faster, because then the advances are going to be taking place on a server side, and those are going to be faster instead of having to do it from the console side. So it is going to be a bigger factor in doing the off-season and being able to knock all of that out. And then, like you said, for those guys that are remote, they'll be able to hop online or hop on their smartphone and do it from there. So it definitely is a big change as far as that goes. And then as well, I know that myself and others that saw it as well were basically saying, these are the bugs. You've got to get these bugs fixed. I know a lot of people had complaints with the recruiting calls especially, and we made sure to point all of that stuff out. So I think it should be a better overall performance of the website, and again, bringing everything from the console over to the web. So one of the things we haven't touched on is that you can now see players in the race for awards. So for example, you can see the top 5 Heisman candidates throughout the course of the season, and you can see their stats and things like that. So it definitely adds a whole lot to the website to just simply, basically, for anytime you're not playing the game, you can still get all the same information that you can on the console.
Of course, anytime we have these big features coming to Dynasty Mode, there's always the discussion of what didn't get touched, what big features didn't get added the community happened to be looking for. This year, I think a lot of it falls under the coaching carousel. Granted, we have some things that affect carousel and carousel movements, but I think a lot of the community might say those are more tweaks or smaller things. But overall, the coaching carousel didn't get a lot of major upgrades like some had hoped for, such as the ability to hire and fire coordinators, the ability to have maybe a bigger staff, coaches to have ratings, a coaching license, an editable pool of free agent coaches, just a lot of things in there that didn't get in that people have been asking for. Jeremy, what are your thoughts? I know it's tough as a game developer, these guys, they can't add everything in a single year. It is kind of disappointing, though, to have a cool feature like this last year that a lot of people said, very good starting point, but then the second year we didn't get, I don't want to say we didn't get anything, but, we didn't get anything. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, it seems like it's kind of running a pattern because Team Builder was implemented and it's never been touched since. And so I think the worry with the community is once they see that coaching carousel hasn't really been touched, is it ever going to get touched? And it's disappointing because, like you said, it was a good base, and there's so many different things you can do. You don't necessarily have to do them all in 1 year, but it would have been nice to get at least a little something. I would have liked hire and fire coaches maybe. I would have maybe even liked coordinator, start your career as a coordinator to really kind of work your way up through the ranks, things like that. Just a little something would have been real nice to be able to kind of add on to it, because it's just hopefully not going to fall in that same line as Team Builder, and kind of hoping, I'm kind of assuming once we get that wish list tournament out here in the fall that it's probably going to be one of the top 2, if not the top item.
Heck, it was pretty high item last year, even with the base in place for it. So I think you're right. I think it's probably going to be one of the final 4, at least, if not 2, or the winner. Tommy, what are your thoughts on Dynasty stuff that didn't get added? And it can be carousel stuff or anything else in the mode.
Yeah, I mean, carousel is a big one. We basically took away from last season that last year from 12s, the coaching carousel was a base, and then it basically gave them something they could build on over time. there's definitely a lot that they can do and a lot that they're going to have to do in order to make it a fully vetted, fully functional feature in order to satisfy everybody. And, things like coaching ratings, things like position coaches, possibly various things that can come and go as far as coaching carousel. And there's so much that they can do. It's just simply one of those things that they've got to do a little bit every year. Even if it's just one small thing every year, they've got to do something. And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's basically something that in order for people to see this as a mode that EA is committed to, they're going to have to do a little bit of something every year.
All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Gaming Tailgate podcast. Great discussion on Dynasty mode. Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments at the forums at thegamingtailgate.com. For Tommy and Jeremy, this is Chris. Everyone, thanks for listening to the Gaming Tailgate podcast.